Round to me, darling. Yes?
Swinging 60s saw the rise of the supermodel, and Finn was in.
Twiggy's a marvellous little thing. She's just like a little fledgling, like a little baby bird.
And as time passed, the industry seemed to demand an increasingly impossible ideal.
How did we go from this to this?
We hear in the news all the time about an obesity epidemic and how people are dying of obesity. And what we see is that it's just not true.
Bodies are worthy if they're healthy or they're not. And if you say that that's not true, I'll kick you in the crotch.
Obesity isn't real. It's a made-up thing.
I'm so sick of mainstream body positivity.
That person who is not trying to lose weight, I love you.
I think that the science isn't actually as clear-cut as we like to believe, and there's not really quite a consensus yet about the real relationship between weight and health.
Intentional weight loss, so you purposely saying, I want to lose 20 pounds, is fat phobic.
The body positivity movement is believed to have surfaced on Instagram in 2012, and its initial purpose was to confront the unrealistic expectations and unrepresentative portrayals of women in media and advertising.
10 years ago, Dove pushed back with its Real Beauty campaign.
More than just one size is beautiful, and aspiring to be healthy is really what matters.
But it hasn't worked for everyone.
For me, body positivity is something that did feel a little bit toxic. A bit like the toxic positivity that says, you have to find your body beautiful or else you're somehow doing it wrong.
And it also seems to have taken a slight detour, because Googling the words body positive led me down a rabbit hole that became increasingly radical, confusing, and a little bit weird.
The NAAFA, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance, which was started by a white man who actually had a fetish for oversized women and started the group to bring acceptance to him in hopes less people would make fun of him for his choice of women.
Kia ora, I'm Davina Zimmer, and today on The Detail, the body positivity movement has been around for more than a decade, but women are still struggling with beauty standards.
I have 3 daughters, and there's a lot of pressure on them to have beautiful eyelashes, big round bums, and really there's still that pressure to be thin and have a certain look.
The movement also seems to have deviated from its initial purpose, that is, to accept all shapes and sizes, because apparently only certain people are now allowed to be body positive.
Now that body positivity has been co-opted by all bodies, and people are finally celebrating medium and small girls and people who occasionally get roles, fat people are still getting the short end of this movement. No one cares anymore because it's like body positivity is for everybody.
It also seems to have resulted in a rise of creators promoting questionable and potentially harmful content. And it's worth noting that a lot of these claims can't be substantiated by scientific facts.
At the most extreme end, health at every size supporters and fat activists argue that obesity is not dangerous and that bodies naturally come in all shapes and sizes, all the way up to 600 pounds. Some even call the obesity epidemic a myth. They say it doesn't kill people or cause disease.
Health professionals have been quick to speak up, accusing those involved of manipulating scientific evidence to validate their personal bias.
A lot of them saying that there's no data that losing weight actually makes you healthier. If you're talking about somebody being obese and losing weight, that's just not true. If you lose weight, it makes you healthier.
And it really just angers me that there's people out here manipulating minds of people who have an obvious food addiction to not worry about being obese.
They also say calorie deficits don't work. They're citing data that shows that the majority of people who lose weight put it back on. That is valid data. That is not the same thing as calorie deficits not working. Calorie deficits do work. The reason people regain weight is because they don't maintain those calorie deficits.
So, where did it go wrong? Here's Kate Mann, an associate professor in philosophy at Cornell University in New York, to tell me how it all started.
Body positivity is a very cool movement historically with roots in Black feminism. And really, it's meant to be an antidote to the constant judgment and policing of, in particular, larger bodies. So it really has its roots in the work of fat activists and people who were trying to get some kind of conversation going between Black pride and fat pride. And yeah, the idea is to be positive about our own bodies and also that of others in response to that relentless negativity and coercion and correction of bodies.
We're about, over a decade into this movement now. Where have we gotten to?
So I think that there has been rightly a lot of pushback against where the movement has ended up. I think that for a lot of people, it seems like it's lost its radical roots. And this is an argument that's been made by the Black feminist Yvette Dion in a very powerful way, and is also something that has been talked about in fat activist spaces, that it has become to some extent a matter of often centering thin white bodies who are celebrating a mere roll of flesh or a couple of stretch marks. It doesn't always end up centering the bodies that the movement was designed to center.
So what would you say the core element of body positivity is meant to be?
I think just the message of being positive rather than negative about our bodies. That's that in a nutshell.
And does that not include people who may fit the more idealized female beauty standards?
It's true that we can say we should be positive about all bodies, but that ends up being a little bit like the phrase all lives matter. No one doubts that all lives matter. The thing is that when someone points out that certain bodies are devalued or certain bodies are subject to aesthetic derogation, it's trying to highlight particular forms of marginalization that deserve to be centered in political movements. Of course, it's true that all bodies deserve positivity and respect and dignity and compassion and care. But there are certain bodies that often at the intersections of Blackness and fatness and perhaps other marginalized characteristics like being trans and disabled and so on, yeah, those are the bodies that are subject to forms of oppression that can be analogized to being on fire and needing certain kinds of particular care that mean we should be directing attention there politically and morally.
But has the body positivity movement shifted and even made things worse by influences in particular making us become even more attentive to looks than we used to be?
I had no idea that hip dips were a thing, and I never cared about them until someone in the body positivity movement said that we should love our hip dips, and they didn't bother me until I was told to accept them. If I need to be encouraged to love something about myself, it must mean that it's less than ideal, otherwise it wouldn't even have been mentioned in the first place. And that in turn can create an insecurity that didn't exist in the first place.
Kate would want to see hard evidence on the suggestion that body positivity has had the reverse effect of what was intended.
One study that I am aware of that is quite interesting on this score showed that when participants were subject to what they called toxic body positivity, where the message was, be positive about your body or else, they reported not having higher self-esteem or better body image after those interventions, as opposed to what the researchers called body autonomy supportive messages, which said you only have one body and you may as well love the body that you're in. And that suggested that bodily autonomy should go hand in hand with positivity. And then people did report having higher self-image afterward, feeling less negative comparison with other bodies. So it seems like it matters how the body positivity is being practiced and whether it is potentially something that can come across as a bit toxic, like you must feel this way or else you're making a mistake and maybe betraying a movement or doing it wrong somehow.
Do you think that the introduction and the rise of social media has been harmful or helpful to this movement?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that, yeah, in a way, social media is a very mixed bag from the perspective of body liberation, because it's wonderful as someone who is larger or who has some kind of marginalized characteristic to find representation, to find ordinary people with a similar body to yours or similar features posting proudly online and just living their lives in a way that is visible and represented.
A new survey on body image released today by the Mental Health Foundation has revealed that 1 in 5 of us have felt shame or disgust over our bodies. And this new report claims that many people blame this on social media.
On the other hand, you have a lot more ability to find and be found algorithmically by really problematic content that is emphasizing traditional feminine beauty ideals that celebrate thinness and whiteness and smoothness and youth, and really say that there's only one good way to have a body, and that's by looking like a small, slim, white girl.
Somewhere along the lines, I lost the confidence that I originally had. And I feel like social media is one of those factors.
But can social media be useful if it's used in the right way? Hannah Tan Cliffe thinks so. She's an author specialising in body acceptance, eating disorder recovery and mental health.
I think it's had its advantages and disadvantages. I guess from my point of view, it's allowed me personally to connect with people and to have a broader view on body confidence and body acceptance and fat liberation and find information easily, to make connections easily. But then I think conversely, I think social media reinforces this external compass for ourselves. It makes us think about what others think of us, almost like an external navigation system. Like, rather than thinking, what do I want in my life and what's important to me and what are my values, like sort of living from the inside out, it's that living from the outside in. How is this going to appear? How am I going to appear? How am I going to be judged? And I think for me, and I look for my daughters, I think that's probably one of the more harmful things about social media is making choices in your life and considering yourself from the outside in. Yeah, I think that when you start to heal from an eating disorder, that is a huge part of your recovery and empowerment, is to start thinking not about how I look and how I appear to others, but who I am inside. And I think social media does the converse of that. So I think that at its root is what's most problematic about it. And then you've got other things like groups or movements that people feel ostracized from, body positivity is not for me, or, you're not fat enough to be part of a body positivity movement, or, there's all these kinds of other repercussions. But at the heart, I think that's the most dangerous thing about social media. I think it's important to curate your feed and make choices about what you're looking at, because your brain is such a sponge. And I feel like looking at women in bigger bodies has really helped me to normalise roles and cellulite and different shapes and disabilities and different colours and burns and all the rest of it. I think has been really, really helpful. It's something that I would happily and enthusiastically recommend to people.
It's human nature to compare ourselves. It's how we make sense of the world and where we fit. Former postgraduate student Porsche Campbell says social media has increased how often we engage in this human trait by providing essentially unlimited opportunity to compare. About 2 years ago, she completed her master's research on the way millennial women make sense of body-positive content on Instagram. She discovered that while Instagram claimed that giving greater diversity of body shapes and sizes would make people feel more positive about their own bodies, the result was actually the opposite.
Body positive content and body positivity as a movement is about accepting and normalizing difference in bodies. But this was also held concurrently with the notion that actually the movement doesn't have enough empowerment power. So whilst it intends to do one thing, which is promote the acceptance of different types of bodies, it doesn't actually have the groundswell to gain any of that real momentum to make societal change. I looked at how the body positivity movement actually reproduces normative appearance ideals. And that talks a lot about how the movement itself has been co-opted by a lot of thin Western women who look a certain way. They may be conventionally more attractive than a regular person. And so actually because of that, the movement itself has become diluted because of that co-option. I also considered the fact that Instagram itself as a platform facilitates problematic looking. The sheer volume of content that's available, the fact that we have our phones with us all the time, there is a greater volume of exposure, but there are also greater opportunities for exposure. You're standing in the line waiting for a coffee, you're scrolling Instagram, you're exposed to 100 bodies in the space of, 2 minutes while you're waiting for your coffee. The way that content is created and reproduced and distributed now just means that there are millions of opportunities for that problematic looking.
Is that because it's ingrained in us to compare?
Comparison itself is actually a pretty typical behavior. We make comparisons all the time. You know, do I want this avocado or that avocado? Am I going to buy those black shoes or these black shoes? We're relational beings, we're social beings. We make sense of who we are in comparison to others. I'm a wife, a daughter, a sister. I am those descriptors because of my relations to other people. And so there is an aspect of that comparison that is pretty normal. That process of physical comparison is underpinned by Leon Festinger's, and he's got a social comparison theory, which suggests that humans make sense of our own attributes when we compare ourselves to others. And that process is actually innate, and it does contribute to our sense of self-worth and success. But it can be both upwards and downwards, which I found really interesting. So you can have an upwards comparison where you compare yourself to somebody that you perceive to be better, and it doesn't have to be physical, but often it is. Or you can compare yourself downwards, where you might compare yourself to somebody that you perceive to be worse off. And obviously those have influences on how we feel about ourselves. So the process itself is pretty natural. It becomes problematic when it really starts to detrimentally affect how you feel about yourself. I think a lot of my participants referred to people that posted body positive content as being brave. That word brave came up a lot, which was really interesting because there was obviously some dissonance between how they felt about the images that they were looking at. You know, the comments were, oh, she's so brave. But then conversely, they'd say at the same time, I could never do that. So on one hand, they were complimentary about the body positive images, but that actually didn't translate into changing of behavior for themselves. It's such a nuanced experience. It really is. And it's an emotional experience too. I think you're looking at these images through your own subjective lens, you know, and that's been influenced by your own culture, your upbringing, your personal values and beliefs. There's no one clear answer. I think people get hung up on, you know, comparison is negative, comparison is toxic, and it absolutely can be, but there is an aspect of it too that is innate and is pretty typical behavior. We just have to be mindful of when it starts to make us feel not great about ourselves, that we probably need to look at some of the behaviors that we're engaging in.
In a way, the body positivity movement was meant to stop, or at least limit self-comparison, and encourage us to love our body for what it is. But it's proven to not be that simple, and as a result, body neutrality emerged in 2015 as an alternative for those who felt loving their physique was just too far-fetched. But for Kate, both of these movements fit about as well as the wrong size of jeans.
For me, body positivity is something that did feel a little bit toxic, a bit like the toxic positivity that says you have to find your body beautiful or else you're somehow doing it wrong. And the option of body neutrality, where we maintain a purely neutral attitude towards our own form, that is closer to what I believe, but it still feels a bit lacking, a bit lackluster, a bit wan, a bit depressing. Neutrality, there are a number of words that you can use for it, like psychologists suggest the expressions feeling meh or so-so. And those are kind of words about your own body that they're almost tinged with negativity again. There are actually some people who, as psychologists, say that there's no such thing as true neutrality. And I'm not sure if that's right, but it's at least very hard to be truly neutral, to have no feeling one way or the other about our own bodies when that's such a fraught topic. So yeah, the worry is that neutrality is really hard to maintain and easily turns into low-key negativity. And I began to think when I was working on this topic, well, why do we have to have an attitude that is monolithically positive or neutral if there wasn't this prospect of negative judgment all the time? And wouldn't it be more liberating to throw out the scales and the implicit quantification altogether? Wouldn't it be better to think of the body as just not there for comparison or consumption or correction? And that led me to really a mantra that became the one that I adopted, where I came to think of it as my body is for me, your body is for you, and so on and so forth for everyone in the world. And the idea is what I call body reflexivity. And it's this idea that the body is something that shouldn't be assessed, even positively, even neutrally, let alone negatively. We don't have to go around assessing bodies at all. We can think of them as just not subject to judgment or this relentless beauty contest where feels a bit empty in the end to say everyone gets a participation trophy. Like, why not just not have the pageant?
Researcher Porsche Campbell says telling everyone they should appreciate their body no matter what shape it's in doesn't gel with the movement's original aim.
The body positive movement, its origins were about the acceptance of bodies and self-love and the rejection of societal, patriarchal, westernized, norms of thin and societal standards of accepted beauty. They were a rejection of that. And I think that feels more inclusive position to take on the movement. If you say that you must feel positive about your body, I think that's layered with feelings of guilt if you don't. I don't think that anybody should tell you how you feel about your body. I think it's about your own experience with your body. And it's often a journey. Often your relationship with your body changes as your body changes, as you get older and go through life stages, your body changes. And that's a really personal journey and experience.
I used to read my kids a little picture book that said, it's okay to have blue hair and it's okay to like fish and there's, like this kind of thing. And there was one page that said it's okay to be fat. And I had the hardest time reading that page. And I think really getting comfortable with the word fat makes you consider all the things that you attach to that word. And it makes you really reflect what your relationship is with the word fat and fatness itself. And then from the sort of inside out, I guess, it makes you realise how you're engaging with other people in the world who do live in fat bodies. So yeah, I think having a little practice with the word fat and spending some time considering your comfort with it and getting used to it is actually a really small but important thing to do, both for yourself and for the world.
All right, I'm going to ask you one question.
What's the question?
If you could change one thing about your body, what would you change?
Have a mermaid tail.
Probably like a shark mouth, so I could eat a lot of stuff.
I could have teleportation in my body. Extra 20 years. I want legs like a cheetah so I can run faster like a cheetah. I could have wings so I could fly.
I don't think there's anything to change.
I like my body actually.
Yeah, you wouldn't change anything?
Nothing else. Just a mermaid tail.
That's all for today. Thank you to Porsche Campbell, Hannah Tan Cliffe and Kate Mann. The Detail is funded by RNZ and NZ On Air. This episode was produced by Alexia Russell and engineered by Alex Harmer. I'm Davina Zimmer. Ka kite anō.